Thanks
We
for
are
having me.
happy to have you.
Yeah. Why don't I start by sharing my screen here to get the ball rolling? And so hopefully, can everybody see my screen? Maybe a thumbs up or everything like that. So, all right. So we ready? Should we get going? Yeah. All right. Thanks everybody for having me. My name's Sandy Khaund. As someone just asked, for those of you who know who the Mount Diablo Unified School District board members are, my wife is the president of the school board. So, but fortunately, she was able to introduce me to Ms. Ramos, who gave me the opportunity to speak here. So I'm really excited. What we'll try to do is I'll try to kind of run through a bunch of things for the first 30 minutes. And then if there are questions or anything like that, would love to be able to answer them. I'd also say that sort of give you a preview of what I'm going to do. I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm working on now, sort of what kind of keeps me busy, my day job or jobs, if you will, for right now. Then I'd love to walk you through my career a little bit, kind of where I came from when I was sort of a student until now. That's a lot of age. You know, I'm not going to tell you how old I am. I don't even want to date myself, but you know, it's old. And share a little bit of that. And then some interesting projects that I've worked on along the way, sort of specific products that I've been engaged with that I think, like I was mentioning to a couple of folks earlier, but hopefully makes an entertaining story and hopefully is a little bit educational to show one path to go down in terms of sort of a career that had a lot of angles around it. I will say that having looked at some of the other speakers that you're going to see this week, I'm probably a little bit more on the technical side and a little less on the art side. My art capabilities probably aren't much better than stick figures. But with that said, the merging of art and technology is very real, very exciting. In fact, I wish I could learn more. And I believe your speaker tomorrow, Marco Contreras, or I know he's later this week, is a very, very good friend of mine. And he's a brilliant artist. He is like the yin to my yang to a certain degree. So you're going to see a little bit of the two angles of sort of careers around this place. So without further ado, my LinkedIn link is up there for those of you who are on LinkedIn. I'll put it at the end of the presentation as well, but you can see a little bit more about what you're about to see right now or kind of go back to it. But just a little bit on me personally today. So technically my role is I am the Vice President of Blockchain Products and actually also Ticket Management for Live Nation and Ticketmaster. If you're a music fan, you probably know Live Nation. They have all the biggest artists, everyone from Beyonce and Lizzo to U2 and the Foo Fighters to Taylor Swift. We've done a number of them, and Ticketmaster is likely where you have been buying the tickets. I'll explain a little bit more about how I got through my career to end up at a place like that. As you guys know, with sort of what's happened in the past year, live events, you probably haven't been to a concert in the last year. You're not alone. No one's been to a concert in the last year. So late last summer, I took a leave of absence from Live Nation and Ticketmaster just while things were slow and decided to do a few other things. So one of the things I do is that I am a VC or a venture capitalist at a place called Mindspring Capital. So we've invested in a number of companies, mostly in the sports tech space. I'm a big sports fan. Ticketmaster also sells sports tickets as well. So it's been a great opportunity to kind of stay close to the sports stuff. I am a serial entrepreneur. You'll see a little bit of that in my career. So I am starting my next company. That's the sneak preview of the logo right there, but there's more to it than that. In addition to that, I'm on the board of directors of a cryptocurrency called MakerDAO. If you don't know what a cryptocurrency is, you may have heard of Bitcoin. The next generation of sort of Bitcoin is something called decentralized finance. I'm working with them on a lot of that stuff. It's exciting because it's the future of money, and blockchain, which is sort of where kind of made my bread and butter over the last 5 years, is the underlying technology of it. And that's been a really big thing for me. I am a co-author. I don't have the patience to write an entire book, so I wrote one chapter. It's part of an anthology with a bunch of college professors. In fact, I'm the only non-doctor in the book, which is funny because I'm also the only non-doctor in my family. My father was a PhD. My brother is a medical doctor. I am Mr. Khaund, but for one moment, I am Dr. Khaund. So I wrote a chapter about blockchain and how it's going to affect sports in the 21st century. It was a fun thing to do and to see my name in print, even though I have it on Kindle, so I don't know if that counts for anything. I ran a student accelerator. I called it Weiji. That is the Chinese character for Weiji, where crisis is also the same character that represents opportunity. I funded 6 college students to be able to start their businesses over the summer. All of them had deep student loans or they lost their internships and were in financial dire straits. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll let you start a business over the summer. I'll cover your expenses and everything like that. And I want you to try entrepreneurship when you're just a student. And it's something I encourage everybody to do, whether you have a wage to do it in or not. I am the co-founder and headmaster of Inventors University. It's something I've done with my wife and my daughters, where we actually taught classes on computer programming to elementary school kids on Saturday mornings at the Concord Library. Again, a little hard to do in 2020 and 2021, unfortunately. So we haven't been able, we're hoping to get back to it in one way or another, maybe even virtually, but it's something that's really near and dear to my heart because I love tech. But when I was younger, I didn't come from a lot of money. Access to technology is difficult. So we gave Raspberry Pis, these small sort of credit card sized computers, to everybody and taught them how to write code in Python, taught them how to write code in Scratch, taught them how to do 3D modeling. It was really a fun experience, and I hope to continue to do it. We did it for 3 years, hope to get back to it. And the final thing of note, I'm on the board of directors of a nonprofit called WAM, Women's Audio Mission. To me, getting more girls and women interested in science and technology careers is really important. This group, Women's Audio Mission, is a music studio that's in San Francisco and in Oakland that is committed to teaching young girls and women how to get into audio engineering careers. And even if it's not an audio engineering career, ultimately is a gateway into just general STEM careers. So for me, it's an exciting thing, and it's kind of consistent with both what I care about with engineering, is just as well as gender equity, being the father of 2 awesome daughters, as well as just knowing that growing up in an engineering environment where my classes were usually comprised of 90% males, which stinks on so many levels I can't even begin to tell you, but that's kind of my way of trying to give that back. So that's kind of what I do with my day jobs, as well as a couple other things here and there, but it keeps me busy. I love every one of these things. They are just absolutely fun to do. But the question kind of becomes, how does a 41-year-old person get to this point, kind of going back to when I was closer to your age? And that's kind of what I want to do with the next slide. So my career, where I came from, I am from the great state of New Jersey, Exit 8, for anybody who likes the jokes about New Jersey. We're a big turnpike state. I was actually technically born in Texas, lived there all of 6 weeks, don't remember it very well, moved to New York, but by 4 years old, or just before I turned 4, I moved to New Jersey. That's where I went to elementary school, middle school, high school, and everything like that. Loved it there, really had a great childhood. Ended up going to college at a place called Cornell. Cornell is in upstate New York, really, really cold place, really, really cloudy place, but a wonderful place to go to school. It's an Ivy League school. I went there for my undergrad and graduate in electrical engineering. Learned a lot, had a lot of fun, as is good with college and everything like that. And so after I came out, I really thought I was going to do a PhD. As I mentioned, my father's a PhD. My brother is an MD. I was Mr. Khaund. I had to be Dr. Khaund. And after a while, I'm like, I'm tired of school. And I didn't want to say I hate school. School is good. Stay in school, kids. But it got tiring after a while when you're 23 or 24 and you're still in school. And so I was ready to work. And fortunately, I got a job with Lockheed Martin. And Lockheed Martin, I was working on satellites. I was technically a rocket scientist. And you'd be amazed how little that impressed girls and how boring it was, even though it sounds really exciting. And after about 6 months, I had enough and I felt like I needed to get out. And again, this will date me a little bit, but in the mid 90s, this is when the internet was taking off. This is when the computer revolution was really happening. And it was an exciting time, but not in New Jersey, which is where Lockheed Martin was, not really in New York, but in California, right? Like the one thing we can never forget living here sort of in the East Bay is that we're about an hour away from where the world changed, right? History really, truly changed in Silicon Valley. And for me, that meant getting to go to Intel. And my roommate from Cornell, still one of my closest friends, a lifelong friend, I knew him even before Cornell, said, hey, there's still an open spot here at Intel, you should apply. Greatest decision I ever made, hardest decision, because I grew up in New Jersey and it's hard to leave the East Coast that I love so much. I had never been west of Pennsylvania until I was 24 years old. I'd been east, I'd been to India, my family's from India, but I'd never been west of Pennsylvania until I got in a car and I drove 3,000 miles to basically, the first office I was in was in Folsom, California, which is out in Sacramento. It was an awesome place to be. And I'll talk about some of the products that I got to work on while I was at Intel that actually, even though Intel is kind of more famous for chips, I actually got to work on a lot of software stuff. And that's where I really discovered that it's like, I love software. In fact, I loved it so much that I started a company and I called it Active CD. And if you notice, that's an ugly Comic Sans font. Every art related person on here right now is probably gagging a little bit because I know it's a horrible thing. But in 1998, that was like a cool font. I swear it was. But it's also, we had a logo, but this company was such an abject failure that I can't even find a logo. There is no record in the world of how bad this company was. I found some people, they were the wrong people to work with. The product never quite took off. And when they say, you know, like, if you can't do, like, you know, I did what all failures do when, you know, it's like, I got to start again. And I went back to school. And I went to the University of Pennsylvania. It is the Wharton School of Business. A certain president who shall not be named, former president, did go to the school as well. I kind of dissociate myself from that fact, but I will say that it was a wonderful place to be at for business school. Fun fact about that is that my second year, I was a TA, and one of my students was a guy named Sundar Pichai. Sundar Pichai is now the CEO of Google, so some people did leapfrog me on it, but it was really exciting to be at a place where amazing people were. In fact, one of the candidates for governor, the Republican candidate for governor, was another classmate of mine. He was from a couple of years ago, Neil Kashkari. So there's a lot of people that, you know, get here, you get the opportunity to do really interesting things. It was the idea of taking all the stuff that I had learned in tech and start applying it with sort of a business mindset. I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I failed with Active CD, but Wharton gave me the opportunity to say, okay, now let's figure out why you failed. And there were a lot of times I used to call them the head slapping moments, where I'd be like, oh man, that's what I did wrong, right? And that was the great part of the 2 years there. In the middle of the 2 years, I worked at the Boston Consulting Group. And the Boston Consulting Group is what is called the management consulting company. What you do is you go into different companies, you learn a little bit about what they do. They have a project they want to start, they have a business they want to think about, and you work with the CEO to kind of come up with recommendations on what they should do with their business. It was creating PowerPoint slides for a living, which was a little bit much. Again, another fun fact that I have to throw in here is that my office mate a year later would become the first contestant on the TV show The Bachelor. So once again, you know, you start swimming with some interesting people, literally 2001. And when he explained what he was going to do, he's like, I'm going to go on this show and they're going to introduce me to 20 women. And I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And now it's 20 years later and the show is still on the air and it's still dominant. So, you know, shows what I know about TV. I guess I'm not a TV guy. But even beyond that, the idea of just making slides was not really an exciting thing to me. So came back from the internship and ended up talking to Microsoft. And in 2001, Microsoft was probably the most important company on the planet. Everybody was using Windows. MacBooks weren't all over the place. Mac OS X wasn't the dominant operating system. Everybody used Office and everything like that. And it was a wonderful place to be. I learned so much at this time. I worked for what's called the server and tools business. So if you've ever heard of Windows Server, if you've ever heard of .NET, if you've ever heard of Azure, all these sorts of things around big business computing. But at the same time, I also watched Windows and Office get smaller and smaller because there were a lot of missteps that they made along the way. They had an operating system called Vista. Vista was a horrible operating system, and I got to watch all that. And for me, it was a lesson. It was sort of like if you get a PhD, you can do something called a postdoc where you continue to kind of be a student a little while and kind of extend it out. I felt like this was a postdoc for my MBA where I got to learn all these business sort of things and watch this business go down. And yet at the same time, build this other business up where I was learning a lot, getting to be more creative. That's when I got to meet Bill Gates, which was the coolest like moment of my professional career. Still to this day, I'm in awe of the man and everything that he's done and everything he's done on the philanthropic side since that time, which is even more amazing. But that's kind of where my career was cultivated and where I really discovered, like, I love software. I love the potential of software. I love understanding how to make products that delight people. And ultimately, you know, when I talked about this merging of engineering and art, I mean, it really comes to this idea of how do you make these great products? And, you know, if you think about the time frame on this, which is around 2001 to 2007, there was no iPhone just yet. In fact, the iPhone came out about 2 months before I left Microsoft. And it was a perfect example of the difference between a tech company and a tech and art company. And the reason why I feel like Apple kind of just leapfrogged Microsoft is that they understood that it wasn't just about something being a utility and being correct. It was also about being beautiful. I mean, at the end of the day, here I am with an iPhone. I don't have a Windows phone, and this thing is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen when it comes to the contours, when it comes to the way that you interact with it and everything like that. And that's one of the things I started discovering. But then in 2007, I wanted to come back down to California. Microsoft is up in the Seattle area, and as much as we loved Seattle, my father-in-law was ill, and we wanted to be closer to him, and we were kind of ready for me to get back to sort of the Silicon Valley roots. And I came to work for a company called Pixo. And Pixo is a social network, and it's a social net. It was 2007. It was a social network, and it was targeted at teens. And particularly, it was targeted at teen girls, like 15-year-old girls, 15 to 18-year-old girls. Now, to be very clear, I didn't understand 15 to 18-year-old girls when I was a 15 to 18-year-old boy. So it was kind of silly that I was coming to a company that did that. But at the same time, it was kind of exciting to be like, social networks is an important thing. The way for kids to express themselves, for adults to communicate. This is when Facebook was just becoming sort of an everyday household word and everything like that. It's when MySpace was still a thing, which, you know, a lot of you probably aren't even old enough to know what MySpace is, right? But the idea of social networking wasn't an obvious thing. It was something that people were learning. And for me, it was a great opportunity to kind of embrace that and also understand, what is it that people like? What is it that delights people? What's exciting about it? And when I go through some of the products I've worked over time, you'll see a little bit of that same sort of thing around, you know, this common thread around how do you do things that are exciting and different and pushing the envelope on stuff. But for me, at the same time, I also got the entrepreneurship bug again. I wanted to start another company. And when I looked at the iPhone and I looked at this opportunity to basically be like, wow, you can take this device with you anywhere, and you can watch video and you can interact and everything like that. And I created a company called Ironsoft. My daughter's names are Iris and Robin. So Ironsoft is Iron. It's a hybrid of their names and then the soft. Just to explain it a little bit more, I always wanted to act with integrity. And I knew that if I put their names on a business, I would never do anything but act with the utmost integrity, because there's nothing I care about in the world more than the two of them. And part of it was also because I wanted to educate the world. I wanted to bring distance learning. I mean, it's ironic. It's a funny term now. Now we all know distance learning is the thing we've been doing for the last year and we've gotten too much of. 10 years ago, I was like, hey, this is a cool thing as a complement, as an addition to the regular learning that you have there. And the idea is that you pull out your phone while you're at the bus, while you're at the doctor's office, you know, anything like that. And you'd be able to just take a class and you could interact with your classmates, you know, taking notes, you know, asking questions on forums and stuff like that. The good news is we were considered Fast Company's top 10 most innovative education companies. We were in Time magazine. We won a bunch of other awards. I was nominated for World Technology Award. I don't know what that is, but it was really cool, and there was a big gala around it. I didn't win, so not as cool as it could have been, but it was a great opportunity. But the truth is that it was a difficult business to make sustainable, right? Some of those lessons that I learned at Wharton, I probably didn't necessarily successfully apply to the point where I couldn't make it a sustainable business. And after a while, I kind of had to wave the white flag on it. And that brought me to Turner Broadcasting. A lot of you probably know it now as Warner Media, but basically it's the TV station that owns everything from TBS and TNT to Cartoon Network and Adult Swim, CNN, and Headline News. And for me, a news junkie and a sports junkie, this was awesome. For 3 years, I got to work on a lot of really cool products that were associated with the NBA, which the NBA on TNT and the Final Four, it's all shown on Turner Networks. To CNN, and especially in 2012 around the presidential election between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. It was really exciting to do that sort of stuff. And again, you know, as you think about, and I'll talk a little bit about one of the key projects that I worked on there that was probably the crazier of the projects, but as you thought about how Twitter became bigger and bigger around that time, when you thought about how Instagram became bigger and bigger around that time, and how telling news, whether it's as CNN or whether it's as the NBA on TNT, being able to convey news not in a traditional format where there's an anchor and he's just, he or she is just sitting there and explaining something, but actually being able to publish, players being able to publish things, people who are newsmakers being able to publish things on these social networks, being able to kind of engage with that and say, okay, we've got this great content, but how do we get people to consume it in new and interesting ways? What's the easier way? And now, in fact, it's almost gotten too bad because you get to this question around misinformation and disinformation and fake news and stuff like that with a lot of these social networks. I try not to take blame, but to a certain degree, you do think about the idea that's like, what's the monster we've created to a degree? But at the time, it was more exciting because our thesis was the more knowledgeable citizen, the better citizen they are. It's just a matter of kind of being able to manage the information. But being there at the groundswell of the time where Facebook was crossing hundreds of millions and eventually 1 billion users, Twitter was getting more and more common. It wasn't quite used the way it was for the last 4 years where the president really used it as his primary platform. We were before that, but it was a great opportunity to learn about that stuff and think about the products that are there. Eventually, after a few years, Turner was an Atlanta-based company. I was out here in the Bay Area. They said, we need to close up the San Francisco office, but we want you to come to Atlanta. I said, I love visiting Atlanta. I can't move to Atlanta. And so I took another job with a company called In Stadium. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a big sports nut. In Stadium was a network of 450 professional college sports venues, right? So Oracle Park and the former Oracle Arena and Chase Center as examples. Chase Center wasn't around then, but each of those other buildings or the Coliseum, we would put ads on the screen between batting practice and first pitch or warm up and tip-offs and everything like that. And what I like to say is that when the company was founded, you had no choice. If you go to a game or even a concert or anything like that, and you're waiting for the show to start or you're waiting for the game to start, where are you going to look? You're just going to look up there. Well, that's 2003. By 2015, when I joined this company, the big screen had competition and it's the little screen, right? If people are kind of looking down here. So we had a thesis of if you can't beat them, join them. And so we built this web app that basically coincided with what was going on the big screen. So one of the games that we kind of built was, as an example, on the big screen, it would look like someone threw you a football pass and you had to raise your hand up to catch the football in the time that the football was landing down, right? We were trying to innovate with the fact that there's a lot of interesting hardware in an iPhone, like an accelerometer, that basically can notice when the phone's moving and what direction it's moving and everything like that. So it was an opportunity to innovate, but I like to joke that they were a Chicago marketing private equity-led company, and I'm more of a San Francisco tech VC-led company, which is a little bit more around innovation as opposed to make money right away. It's more about, to use a term that Jeff Bezos once used, invent and wander, which is like, let's come up with an idea and let's learn and let's experiment with it. Let's discover where the true beauty of the idea was. And so that led me to yet another startup. They say third time's the charm. Active CD was an abject failure. Ironsoft didn't quite make it out. So I'm like, all right, I got one more in me. And if this one doesn't work, I just got to kind of give up, I guess. But the idea of Upgraded was event tickets on the blockchain. So when you actually go to an event, right now, a lot of times it's a PDF printout. It might be something that's on your phone, but you can screenshot it and send it to other people. There's not a lot of security around it. If you are Madison Square Garden, or if you are Chase Center, or for that matter, if you're Beyonce or the Golden State Warriors, you'd also like to know who has that ticket. You don't want the PDFs to just pass around. You want to know, oh, it's Sandy at the, Sandy and Anna went to a concert or something like that or whatever. So we basically use the blockchain, and the blockchain is sophisticated technology, and I could probably spend an hour talking just about that. I won't bore you with that. I'll try to navigate the boredom factor here, but the idea behind it is blockchain is the underpinning of something called Bitcoin, which I mentioned earlier, this concept of cryptocurrency and money, but it can also be used to do a lot of other things. And that was sort of the epiphany that I had with Upgrade, is that, hey, wait a minute, we can use it to track who gives a ticket to who. We can restrict it so that if you got the ticket because you're part of the Beyonce fan club, you can't turn around, go on StubHub and resell it for a bunch of extra money. and then just buy a ticket further back and take the profits or anything like that. So we were building a lot of security features in. We were also creating it so that you could have added value, so you could have concert cash and stuff like that. So you could pre-buy, like, you know, drinks or a t-shirt or anything like that at a discount. And then when you get to the event, you could be able to buy it. So my claim to fame on all of that is that in 2018, Upgraded, my company, was acquired by Ticketmaster. And Ticketmaster, which is part of Live Nation, I put both of those logos up there before. Ticketmaster is part of Live Nation. They're one and the same company. They liked what I was doing. They liked the technology. I'm assuming they liked me. They signed me up for a few years, and they decided to buy it. Now, the nice thing about this from a career perspective is that when you're an entrepreneur, the two goals you kind of have, maybe three goals. One is a sustainable business that you can do and you have fun and you enjoy. Obviously, that's kind of the baseline. In Silicon Valley, a lot of times it's about whether you can go public, so you have a publicly listed stock, or someone buys your company, because a lot of times there's a lot of money that's involved in everything like that, as well as there's sort of credibility in the area. So for me, this was a crowning achievement. It was a pretty big deal for me. It was really kind of exciting. But when I kind of look back on my career, it's one of the many things that, like, I enjoyed. It were kind of my big things. And so with that, and just kind of stating that, and I shared kind of how I got from Live Nation to where I am today, where I've taken leave at Live Nation and kind of done the other stuff. But I figured, because this is sort of a media meets tech sort of thing, I'd share a couple of the different products that I worked on. I like to think of it as my trophy case to a certain degree. Again, being 49 years old, like, there's a lot of things that I've done, and I look back with some level of gratitude that I was able to work on some of these projects, some of which I was a small part of, some of which I was a bigger part of. But it shows the breadth of two things. One, of my career that I'm really proud of, but almost more importantly, the different ways that technology, the different ways that products come out that are infused by this merging of art and technology. And if you see it as an evolution, I'm going to kind of lay it out that way to a certain degree, you'll kind of understand where, not only where we are, where we've come from and where we are right now, but I also feel like to a certain degree where we're going to be going and what's exciting about that. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I worked for Lockheed Martin. That was my first job out of engineering grad school. I worked on the DirecTV satellite. In fact, I worked on the DirecTV satellite and I worked on the GPS satellite. So the fact is that there are satellites floating in the air, of which I had something to do with, that help you either watch TV or find yourself on Google Maps when you're completely lost. At the time, I thought that was amazing, especially the GPS. I'm like, seriously, you're just like lost somewhere on the 405 or whatever, on, you know, Route 1, and like it'll tell you where. Yeah, I don't believe it. And now it's kind of like we all just take it for granted, right? Like, no one packs a map anymore, they just pack a phone. So it was exciting to be a part of it, but it felt a little esoteric, because there's this thing that's floating out in space, you know, miles away, that like you can't, it's not really tangible or anything like that. But by the time I went to Intel, I got to work on chipsets. And that was really cool, because suddenly I was working on silicon, I was working on transistors, and this transistor went inside what was called at the time the 440BX chipset. So it went to millions of laptops around the world, right? And that was an awesome sort of thing. But the truth is again, like, these transistors were microns wide, right? Like, you can't even see it. Even though the laptop felt tangible, it wasn't quite tangible. And so I still hadn't felt my sowing my oats until I got to work on Madden football. And I worked with Intel on Madden football. And anybody on this call that is a sports fan, and even if you're not, you might know what Madden football is. It is the best-selling video game series of all time. It's been around for about 30 years. It's named after an old football coach named John Madden, who became a broadcaster. And it was my favorite video game. And the opportunity to be able to play a game as a kid, grow up, get a real job, and then get to work on that game that you played as a kid was probably still one of the biggest thrills of a lifetime. But it also became tangible to me. I finally was able to figure out how all those programming classes I took and all the stuff that I was working on in school lent itself to something that I cared about. Like, it was kind of the boomerang where it's coming out. It's like, okay, I did learn this stuff for a reason. It wasn't just about products. It was about doing cool stuff. And I'm going to make, like, people be able to run faster. And this was in 1998 when I got to work on it. It was the first year that we got to like 30 frames per second. 30 frames per second is where things stop looking choppy and they start looking more video oriented. And again, 20 plus years ago, but it's just amazing to have been a part of something like that. And that really got me excited. And then eventually kind of the web became more and more important. And again, dating myself a little bit here, but I got to work on something at Microsoft called Codeplex. And the interesting thing about Codeplex, there's a couple of interesting things about Codeplex. For anybody who is on the coding side, you're probably familiar with a site called GitHub. This was GitHub before GitHub. And there's another bunch of stories I can talk about that. But the most important thing is that with open source software, with this idea of developers wanting to be able to share code, we saw that opportunity, we created it, but we had to create a website from scratch, right? And for me, that was a brand new thing to do. How do you conceive it? How do you design it and everything like that? Even like looking down at the logo, the way the page was kind of laid out and everything like that. And again, I'm a stick figure guy. I left some of this to other people, but with that said, it was the first time that I think I really understood the concept of a user experience designer. The first time I really thought about, oh, we need to care about navigating the page, and it doesn't just have to be just throw stuff on a screen and people will figure it out, right? If you want people to use your product the first time, if you want people to stay with it, I always say that every business is attract, retain, and monetize. You want to attract customers, you can do it with sandwich boards on the corner for a local sandwich shop, or you can do it with banner ads or Google clicks and everything like that. But to be able to retain the customer, to keep them coming back, you have to make it easy to use. You have to make it aesthetically pleasing. You have to make it so that people can do something meaningful with it almost as quickly as they get to it, because you have basically, I always like to tell people that I was once told that in the military they have this concept of the golden hour, right? Like if a soldier is wounded in battle, you have 1 hour to get a medical attention or her medical attention, or else the odds of survival drop considerably. I switched it for the web and I said, you have the golden minute. I think that's probably shortening down to the golden 15 seconds, where if you can't get somebody doing something meaningful with your web app in that like 1 minute or even that 15 seconds, you're going to lose them, and you're probably going to lose them forever, right? So how do you do those sorts of things? How do you think about the onboarding? And that was an exciting thing for me. This project was great. This project was my ticket to meet Bill Gates. So that was cool in and of itself. But in addition to that, I feel like it's my legacy because it lasted at Microsoft for another 12 years after I left. And to me, that's the idea of having a legacy, is something that sticks around long after you're gone. From there, I mentioned I went to the ed tech company that I created called Ironsoft. Ironsoft, we actually made tablets, or we actually co-opted with IBM to make tablets and put our software on it. So we actually had an Ironsoft tablet. And the coolest thing about this for me, and again, once again, the merging of media and technology, the merging of art to create this, custom user interface. And you're seeing sort of the tablet top, as we kind of jokingly called it, but like the desktop on the tablet, to be able to get it. And these tablets went to Mexico, to Kenya, to India, to Japan, to, and I know I'm forgetting a country here, and I can't believe I'm forgetting where else it was, but we were in a number of different countries where in a lot of cases, English was their second language, where we need to be able to leverage the iconography, I think I said that right, to be able to navigate around so they see an image and they know where to go to the image, even if they couldn't even read the words underneath it. It was a great challenge, but it's an awesome thing. And there was something about having the Ironsoft logo on the back of the tablets that was incredibly gratifying, because it's a company that I started and it became this thing. And ultimately, and I'm kind of jumping ahead and I want to jump back to Turner in a second. There's a reason why I kind of switched the order on this, but with Upgraded, and there you see what the tickets look like a little bit and everything like that. The underlying technology was the blockchain, but what we realized really fast is that, it's not just people, the ages of the students on this call that go to shows. In a lot of cases, it's the parents of the teachers on this call, right? It's the 60-year-olds, it's the 70-year-olds. How do you make something that's easy enough and intuitive enough? How do you not scare them with blockchain or anything like that? Just let them get their tickets in an intuitive sort of way. And again, as an entrepreneur, it forced me to kind of come to grips with the fact that it's like, okay, I can't just throw a Spartan ticket up there and expect that to work. I need to make it so much visually compelling. I need to make it easy to navigate around and everything like that. But it was exciting because it was my first opportunity to really nail the mobile phone as a first class sort of product and how we wanted to do things, and the idea of creating an app and a web app at that. But, as I think, and as you look at sort of, you go from a satellite dish, which eventually comes down to a TV, to a laptop, to a tablet, to a phone. And it kind of lets me share the one other sort of quirky sort of project that I was involved in during my time at Turner, but it was Google Glass. And I don't know how many of you remember Google Glass. It was a really big deal back in about 2012, 2013. But the idea is that you would actually wear glasses and the computer would basically be on your head. And at the time, it was a pretty big deal. It got a lot of press. Our CNN app, which my team built, ended up being the most popular. I think it was it was definitely the most popular news app. And I think it was one of the top 3 most popular apps that was running on Google Glass. So the idea that you could be sitting there minding your own business and suddenly there's an alert about a big storm that's about to hit the Midwest and the Deep South or anything like that. And the idea is that you could tap the Google Glass and it would change the channel of the TV to automatically go to CNN, so you could say the latest on the breaking news and stuff like that. And the reason I bring this project up is, I think, for 2 reasons. Number one, Google Glass failed, but I give Google a lot of credit for taking the chance to try something unique, to try something different. At the end of the day, I keep quoting this to my daughters, but Mahatma Gandhi is famous for saying the greatest freedom you have is the freedom to fail, right? Try something and know that it's not necessarily going to work. And technology is made up as much of failures as it is wild successes of the iPhone and everything like that. So I think that's one really big lesson. The other is that the innovation that happens around sort of the use cases, I'd say sort of the conduits of technology that we have here is not done, right? So I can see it from here, my Amazon Echo, which is listening to everything here, and it's ready for me to say, hey, what's today's weather going to be like? Voice has become a really big thing, which nobody could have predicted. Touch screens were the big deal 10 years ago. Now it's voice. It may be brainwaves in the future. Heaven only knows where a lot of this stuff's going. And the opportunity is for the next generation, for a lot of you on this call, to be able to figure out what is the right way, what is the easiest way. Google thought that a persistent camera that's near your eye is the valuable piece. And I actually still think that there may be some room for that at some point in time, but what else is there? If we have voice, what are the other things we can do? What's the best way to get the information out? What's the best way to get the right information out? And that's kind of a lot of where technology is heading. So with that, I'm not sure where we are on time. I apologize because my clock went up at 9:50. So I will first leave this up here. So there's my email address. Any questions you have afterwards, if you're ever thinking about any one of these careers, that's a lot of careers I threw out there, and you have any questions, feel free to email me. Feel free to link me in. You'll see like another version of all but what I just shared with you there. I do have 2 different Twitter accounts. One's a little bit more personal, one's a little bit more professional, but feel free to follow both of those. Technically, I have a 3rd account, but it's strictly around baseball and around the Baltimore Orioles. I didn't think anybody really cared about that on that call, so I spared that from you. But with that, I'll leave these up there, and if there are any questions, I'd love to take them. And I know we're tight on time, so if there's not, that's okay too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sandy. We really appreciate hearing your stories. We actually have a lot of questions in the chat box.
Great.
So I'm going to start reading through them, and then we'll just go ahead. This class is over at 10:20, but
Okay.
I want to give everyone a little bit of time. So we'll try to wrap up at like 10:15.
Perfect. Yeah. So yeah, you can give me the time warning when we hit that, although I'll try to keep an eye on my watch.
Okay, so the first question is from Paola, and she said, why did you choose this career path?
I sometimes I joke that the career path chose me a little bit. I should say that, so not sure if Zoom can make it clear. I'm Indian by descent. So my parents came over from India in the mid to late, actually my dad came over in the early 60s, had an arranged marriage, brought my mom over in the mid 60s. Yes, arranged marriages are real, and I'm a product of one. I was born in the early 70s, and the idea was that my parents were always going to have one doctor and one engineer, so it was kind of preordained a little bit. I actually thought about going into journalism in my mid-high school years. I love writing. I still love writing. I have an entire blog dedicated to being a parent, which I've written less of because my daughters are older now and I want to respect their privacy. But I think at some point I kind of recognized a couple things. I was very good at math, right? Like I knew where my strengths were. And what I like to joke to people is that it's like, I can't play an instrument. I don't draw very well. I'm not very artistic. My canvas is an open IDE, an integrated development environment, or a notepad where I can just write code. I speak one language fluently. I think it's fluent. You can tell me if my English is any good. I don't speak many other languages, but I can write code in about 15 different languages very proficiently. It's what I like to do, and it's where I feel the most creative. And so for me, the same way a number of you may have sort of that artistic tinge that you just want to paint, or you just want to draw, you just want to, do certain artistic things, sculpt, whatever it might be. For me, I found that, and it really doubled down during my college years, that like, I just really like writing code. And I feel like a lot of times I will look at a problem, and in my head, it's already processing like, how would I write a code to solve that algorithm? How would I write code to come up with something that solves? And even like I'm helping my daughter, she's got a science fair project, and I'm teaching her about some of these tools because she learned Python, but she didn't learn the specific piece. And for me, it's exciting because it's doing some analytics around coronavirus statistics. And it's like, God, to solve an answer just by using computers, that's exciting. And so for me, that's where I got into things. And eventually, at some point in time, because I love news and because I love sports, the idea to gravitate a little bit more towards those things is like, boy, it's even great when you can marry your two loves, right? So if it's tech and it's sports, I always joke it's like my Reese's peanut butter cup moment. There used to be commercials about Reese's peanut butter cups where someone got their chocolate and the other person's peanut butter, and someone got their peanut butter and the other person's chocolate. Also, it's like, wow, it's even better when it's together. And that's kind of how it felt for me with engineering and sports and music, because I'm a huge music fan. And I will say, one thing I'll kind of close with is that we got acquired by Ticketmaster, and my favorite football team is the Tennessee Titans. My favorite music group is the Foo Fighters, and Hamilton, the Broadway musical, changed my life. All three of them are ticketed by Ticketmaster. All three of them have been on my technology. It's like a crowning achievement. It's just sort of like that's childhood dreams come true when you do that sort of stuff. So that's kind of how this stuff came together, and that's where I kind of end up where I am right now.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question is from Jonah, and it says, how do you define success?
It's a great question. I think at different times in my life, I've defined it in different ways. I think when I was in school, I was like, okay, I want to be like really wealthy, right? It was like money was the scorecard and everything like that. And as I got older, and even especially in business school, and Wharton's a very competitive school, and I was kind of like, I want to be like the big CEO, one of the biggest companies, and the cover of magazines and stuff like that, everything like that. And as you get older, you kind of realize that it's like, that's nice, right? And to not have to worry about money is a very good thing. But that's not really important in the grand scheme of things compared to certain things that are more important in it. And I always say that it's like, if you're working on something that is meaningful to you or you care about, that you truly wake up every morning lucky to be able to do it. If you're working with people that you love, that you care about, that you learn from, that you respect, you kind of do that. And you have autonomy. You have the ability to go be creative without having to ask permission or anything like that. That's where I am right now. And that, more than the fact that I am financially well off and everything like that, is the ultimate success to me. I think, I used to say that, and this was my biggest discovery when I first graduated from Cornell, is that I called it the X-Files test. And those on the call that are old enough may remember the X-Files. It was a really popular show in the mid-90s, and it was on Sunday nights. And so Sunday night at 9:00, I would turn on the TV, and there it was. It was as close to appointment viewing as you get. And there were the opening chimes of the X-Files, and it was like it was this famous sort of theme song. And I remember when I worked at Lockheed, I would get that sense of dread, because I would sit there and I would think, okay, I'm hearing the chimes, and that means that tomorrow I have to go back to work. Oh, God, I've got to go back to work. And then a few months later, I went to work for Intel, and I moved out to California, and I was there, and I'd hear the chimes, and I had the complete opposite reaction. I'd hear the chimes. I'm like, I'm going to watch this. It's going to be over. I'm going to brush my teeth and go to bed. And tomorrow morning, I get to work at Intel. And I always say that Sunday night measurement of how excited you are to go to work on a Monday morning, that's really the litmus on whether you're successful or not, because you've solved life. If on Monday morning you're excited for what you're doing, you're excited for what you get to go out and work on, you're excited about who you get to work with. And when I've looked throughout my career, my best successes are when I'm in the flow because I'm working with the right people, doing the right thing. And when I think about my startup, when I think about Upgraded before we were acquired, before the money came in, I still felt like I was in the flow because my team was outstanding. I had all this autonomy. We were doing cool stuff. We were preventing people from getting frauded on fake tickets or anything like that. And there was something incredibly rewarding about that that made me feel like a success as much as any other time in my career, even now as I stand here as, you know, relatively wealthy, a venture capitalist, an author, and all these other things that I was really proud of in that first slide. But the biggest thing is I'm doing what I want to do every day.
Thank you. That's really awesome that you get to share that and that you're sharing how important it is to really enjoy what you do. And it makes a difference in how you feel when going to work. I know that you shared a lot of these successes, and we have about 10 questions after this. So
Okay.
this next question is, what was the hardest part of getting to where you are today?
You know, I think there's this one thing about like there's a cartoon where people are like, you know, the road to success, how everybody thinks it looks, and it's like a straight shot arrow straight to the top, and then you see the real road to success, and it's this like crazy roller coaster and everything like that. And I think when I think back on like my career, it really is the roller coaster. And in an hour presentation, it's hard to represent a lot of the roller coaster, but there were a lot of failures, and there are a lot of times when I question myself, a lot of times when I'm like, is this the right path? Am I doing what I'm doing? And at the end of the day, you know, the most important thing is to have confidence in yourself. It's to believe in yourself, right? I always kind of say it's like, if I'm not going to bet on myself, who am I going to bet on? I need to trust my abilities. I need to trust what I'm good at. I need to trust that the combination of my love for what I'm doing and my hard work that I'll put in because I love what I'm doing is going to get me through those tough times. And I always like telling people the story about, it was June of 2017. We were supposed to get acquired then. The deal fell through. I was worried that the company was going to go bankrupt. I was in a hotel room in Anaheim, California at the Doubletree Suites at 3 a.m, just staring up at the ceiling like, oh my God, should I still do this? I have a wife, I have 2 kids, I got all this other stuff. And then I'm like, wait, do I love what I'm doing? Do I feel confident in myself? Can I work hard enough? Is there a possibility this is going to succeed? And that willingness to just kind of, you know, to gut through the hard times, to just recognize that it's not all going to be roses, that it's not all going to be positives. I kind of remind my kids, I'm like, I'm really proud that I went to Cornell, but I got rejected from MIT and Princeton, which were my top 2 choices, right? I'm really proud to go to Wharton. I got rejected from Harvard Business School, which was my dream school, right? And this is an education call, I won't say it, but I have to admit this, I wrote a little acronym that represented an expletive to Harvard on the inside front cover of every exam I took at Wharton. I was kind of motivated by the rejection and everything like that. And I'm not endorsing expletives, but there is something about like trying to gain strength from failure, because failure will happen and that's okay, but they're temporary setbacks. Understand the difference between sort of the battle and the war. And every time I've done that and done that well, it's kind of resulted in success.
Great, thanks. The next question says, if you were not in this career field, what would you be doing instead?
Wow. You know, I can't imagine doing anything else. I love writing. I think I write well, and I've been told that my writing is really good. So I did mention that in high school, like journalism, and particularly sports journalism, because I was such a huge sports fan, was kind of interesting to me. I have written a book about my entrepreneurial experience with Upgraded. I don't know if I'm going to publish it because I have a young college grad who gave me feedback. She's like, this is great, but you need to use names. I'm like, I can't use names. The job isn't to embarrass anyone. It was just to be honest. So, but I love the act of writing. So I think that's probably one of the key pieces. But otherwise, like people say, like if money were no object, it's like I would have done everything the same exact way I did. And that was the fortunate thing. And going back to what success is do what you feel like you're born to do. And I really feel like I was born to, it was either this or play third base for the Baltimore Orioles, but I was not blessed with like nearly enough athletic talent, you know. you don't see many Indian third basemen in baseball. So, you know, I fell back onto tech, and you do see a lot of Indian people in tech. So I don't know if it's a, you know, that is an ethnic thing, but certainly, you know, because it makes me so happy today, I wouldn't want to do anything else.
Great, thanks. The next question is, I think this is a personal opinion, but it says, will Dogecoin or Dogcoin reach 0.1?
If I had a nickel, or if I had 0.001 Bitcoin for every time somebody asked me an opinion about cryptocurrency, I'll just state this. I can't give investment advice because I wouldn't give investment advice. But what I will say is that try to figure out why Bitcoin or Dogecoin or any of these other ones are worth anything. What's behind it? Dogecoin was a joke. If you read the origin story, it was a guy that was just making a coin based on his dog or whatever, and people really get excited about it. But I've never been able to buy an iPhone for a Dogecoin, right? So like, I kind of feel like they're kind of, again, most of you, the adults on this call, lived through a dot-com boom of the year 2000. If you're not old enough for that, you have to understand that everybody thought that any business with the word .com on the end of it was worth a lot of money. We learned that there were a few that were: Google.com, Amazon.com, Yahoo.com to a lesser extent, and a lot of them went down like a house of cards. And I fear the same for cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrency will work, just like there was a Google, there was an Amazon that came out of the .coms. But for every one that'll work, there's going to be 100 that are going to die a sad, grisly death. That's just my take on
I appreciate you pronouncing it correctly. I
it.
would have not known it was Dogecoin. The next question is, what are some new and emerging technical career fields that you think will be really big over the next 10 years?
That's an awesome question. I think, you know, when you think about artificial intelligence and sort of machine learning and everything like that, we're only scratching the surface of what that does right now. The ability, and again, by the way, this is also where sort of like art and technology really come together in a meaningful way, because the ability to process sort of whether it's behaviors or preferences or just actions or anything like that, and to be able to preemptively provide a response on behalf of the person. I always talk about, and this isn't even complex artificial intelligence, but this is the path that we're going to go down at some point in time, is that I am a proud Fitbit wearer. I've worn it for 9 years. I have 9 years worth of data on this thing. I also have a Nest thermostat. And the idea that these devices can talk to each other so that when I go for a 6-mile run on a 90-degree day, that the thermostat kind of cranks up a little bit and gets a little bit colder when I'm on that last mile of the run. All those inputs that come in to be able to provide that experience that delight people, that's where it's coming. So from the technical side, there's some element that basically says, how do you define these artificial intelligence that takes all these inputs? In this case that I just described, it's the Fitbit and the Nest. But there's a lot of other pieces. And by the way, the Fitbit is multidimensional. It's not just that I'm running, but you can also see my heart rate's at 150 and that, you know, I'm having some sort of acute attack or something like that or anything. But how do you couple that with the ability for the consumer to be able to experience it in a meaningful way? One of the things that someone sent was that I saw recently in sort of a meme or whatever, is someone built like the most structurally, using artificial intelligence and sort of optimization techniques, the most structurally sound bridge design ever. But if you saw it, it just looked like an ugly, oozy blob of all this other sort of stuff. And like, no one would want to see a bridge like that. People want the Golden Gate Bridge, not only because it's a structural side that connects Marin to San Francisco, but it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a landmark of San Francisco. So how do we take a lot of these new technologies, and I look at artificial intelligence, and you can almost see it as Internet of Things, like devices like thermostats and wristwatches or whatever, pushing data to a blockchain where the data is managed on blockchain, where big data and artificial intelligence are able to kind of capture the data off of that, process it, and then deliver some interesting sort of experiences back to people. That continuum of technologies leaves a lot of room, and every one of those technologies isn't like, we're not even in the third inning of a 9-inning game. There's just so much left to do with those things, and I think those are the building blocks of everything we're going to see in the future, even more than calculating brain waves or anything like that, as much as I think there's going to be interesting things going on there.
Awesome. Thank you. We have about 3 questions left and maybe 6 more minutes.
Okay.
The next question is, what are some everyday challenges you faced in your profession?
That's a really interesting one. I think, I love being in Silicon Valley. I always say that, if you want to be an actor, you move to New York and go on Broadway. And if you want to be a baseball player, you go play at Fenway Park. And if you want to be in tech, you come to Silicon Valley. And so I'm really proud of being here. But, there are challenges around the fact that it is an old boys network, and boys are important, and it's an old white boys network. And and it's also a younger one. So what you have is you have sexism, you have racism, and you have ageism. And I kind of fall into the third category, a little bit in the second with racism, but not as much as, unfortunately, my Black colleagues and my Latino colleagues. But the idea of kind of navigating around people's perception of you, that's probably structurally one of the biggest challenges. And I mentioned Women's Audio Mission, and even Inventors University, that school that we had was just for girls, really, because the only way to solve this problem is through inclusion, by getting more people engaged. And for me, I've taken upon myself, even beyond sort of those programs, that if a Black person links me, and I will take it automatically, right? I want to be their conduit into this world. If a woman does it, I mentor. I literally I call my list 20-somethings, where I have about 25 people who are in their mid-20s that I mentor actively, talk to them at least once a quarter about their career, make introductions to them, and everything like that. And so for me, that, kind of evolved from, there's a little bit of the racism early on. Now, being in my late 40s, there, I said it, I admit it, late 40s, I deal with a little bit of the idea that I'm not the 23-year-old kid straight out of Stanford or anything like that. There's also a little bit of elitism that's there and everything like that. Fortunately, I haven't had to deal with that because I've gone to good schools and everything, and I have the MBA and stuff. But at the same time, I kind of recognize that that's something that bothers me, not so much in that it hurts me every day. The ageism's there, but now that I've sold a company, I don't have to lean on venture capitalists as much. I can just, I invest in myself, and to heck with those guys. But I do think that that's something that I kind of am taking a personal interest in trying to change.
Great. I have 2 more questions.
Okay.
The next one is, what advice would you give your younger self?
Ooh, that's good. I think a couple of things. I think, and I give it to my daughter, and she'll never admit to being the younger me. In some ways, she probably is more than she cares to admit. But it's like, but the most important thing, and I kind of touched this earlier, but it's like, find your passion, right? Find what you care about, find what motivates you, find what gets you excited. It's like, God, if I could do this all day, I'd do it all day, right? Try new things, experiment. You might be surprised by what your passion becomes. And my career path wasn't necessarily a linear path, and certainly at one point I rejected engineering to a certain degree until I learned to embrace it. But that passion I had for sports and I had for music always kind of persisted until I was able to dovetail it. But finding passion, and also just accepting that it's like, it's, again, freedom to fail. I'll go back to the Gandhi quote, but it's like, try stuff. It's okay. None of the failures you make in your teens, when it comes to professions, or certainly other things you can do, and, drugs, stuff like that. But none of the decisions you make to try new things are going to hurt you later on. They're only going to help you. They're only going to make you better. Try things, experiment with new professions or stuff like that. Okay, I never tried drawing, but I'm going to go on YouTube. I'm going to take an art class, or which I wish I did. I wish I was better than the stick figure guy that I am. But I think that's something that I wish I'd done more of in high school, and especially because today you have things like YouTube, you have online classes, you can afford it, you have master class and stuff like that. Like, I would have loved to have taken a screenwriting class from Aaron Sorkin. I think the guy's a genius, but to have access to that sort of individual to give a class was non-existent. And today it's $10.99 a month, or you can go on YouTube and see other people do that sort of stuff. Take advantage of that and figure out what it is that really gets you excited. That is like the thing that it's like, I'd do this for free if they'd let me.
Awesome. So then the last question that I have here is, what code do you advise learning?
What type of code? I'm assuming what language is probably what it is. I probably write in JavaScript more than anything else. It's a client-side language as well as a server-side language. It's associated with Node.js, which is getting more and more preferred in different places. And there's also a framework called React.js, which is sort of becoming it's reactive programming, and that's becoming more of the common framework that's out there. Upgraded was originally built on Angular on top of JavaScript, and then we migrated over to React.js when we moved over to Ticketmaster, and I think it was probably the right thing. As other ones, Python, when I mentioned artificial intelligence and machine learning, Python is really valuable because it allows you to get access to Scikit and TensorFlow and a number of really critical libraries in that space. So I think that's a really good one to learn as well. And if you go in the corporate world, or actually in mobile is really important too. So Java or Kotlin for Android development, Swift or Objective-C for iOS development. React.js has something called React Native as well. All those things, it's almost like understanding the concepts and the precepts of computer science are as important as sort of the specific languages themselves. Just the same way, just understanding the structure of the language is more important than understanding sort of the semantics or the syntax of the language. But again, if you want to get a job sooner, JavaScript and Python probably at the top of the list along with the mobile development.
Great. Well, I think that's all we have time for as far as questions go. We would like to thank you so much for coming and speaking to our students from Concord High and Mount Diablo High School. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.